Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. Today I'm going to share a moving and transformative story about a near-death experience that brings profound lessons about life, hope, and a big revelation about the future. Before we begin, leave in the comments where you're watching from, because I love to know how far our stories reach. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take this moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Shall we start? My name is Silas Morrow and I grew up in Spokane, Washington. I've always been a fan of routine. My day began early with a quick coffee, backpack on my shoulder, and a run to catch the school bus. On that particular morning, the sky was clear and the fresh air promised a good day. Little did I know everything was about to change. It was a physical education class like any other. And the teacher, Mr. Callahan. An ex-military man with a thunderous voice insisted that everyone give their best in the running test. "Come on, folks. It's not just about speed. It's about resilience," he shouted as we ran around the track. I was fast, not the fastest, but always competitive enough to try to outdo others. Beside me was Lisa Harper, my best friend since we were 8 years old. She was determined and full of energy. "Come on, Silas. You're not going to let a bunch of freshmen beat you, are you?" she teased, smiling. I laughed, but began to feel something strange. My chest felt tight, as if something invisible were pressing down. I ignored it, thinking it was just the strain of running. "You okay, Silas?" Lisa asked, noticing my expression change. "Just a bit tired," I mumbled, trying to mask it, but the feeling worsened. My heart started beating too fast. The world around me blurred, and it seemed the sound of the track was drifting away. The laughter and conversations of other students became a distant hum. I tried to stop, but my legs wouldn't obey. The weight on my chest was unbearable. Everything happened quickly. I felt my body falling forward, heard Lisa scream my name, and then nothing. A complete void. When I opened my eyes, I expected to see the infirmary ceiling or the worried faces of my peers, but that wasn't what happened. Instead, I was lying on something cold and rough, concrete. I stood up slowly, feeling my body strange, almost like I was floating. I looked around and recognized nothing. The court, the students, even the sky. Everything had vanished. In its place, there was darkness and destruction. Rubble covered the ground like a carpet of ashes, and the air was heavy, hard to breathe. In the distance, I saw crumbling buildings and abandoned cars, some still smoldering. A burnt, acrid smell permeated everything. I called out for Lisa, but my voice echoed without response. I wandered through the debris, my feet kicking pieces of concrete and glass. A distant sound like a lament cut through the silence. What was that? Was I dreaming? Dead? Is anyone there? My voice sounded small in that vast and devastated landscape. It was then that I noticed something strange in the sky. The ruins were falling slowly, almost like snowflakes, but they were black and laden with sadness. Feeling lost, I continued walking, hoping to find someone, anything that explained where I was. But the loneliness of the place seemed to swallow everything around me. Each step seemed to echo in a lifeless world, and that's when I saw it. In the distance, a solitary figure stood out among the ruins. A man dressed in white, standing silently. He seemed not to belong to that scenario. His eyes. I can't forget his eyes. They were filled with sadness, but also with a compassion that made me feel I wasn't completely lost. When I tried to approach, he vanished, as if he had never been there. Everything around me started to spin, and before I could understand, a bright light engulfed everything. When the blinding light faded, I realized I had been transported to an even stranger and more disturbing place. I was standing in what seemed to be the center of a city, but everything around me was unrecognizable. Where there should have been buildings, bustling streets, and people, there were now ruins. Rubble of concrete and metal was scattered everywhere, and twisted light poles pointed at the sky like accusing fingers. The air was dense, heavy, and the smell of burning was so strong it made my stomach churn. Ashes continued to fall like a constant rain, covering everything in a ghostly mantle of gray and white. It was as if the world itself had died, leaving behind only the remnants of its agony. As I walked slowly, trying to absorb what I was seeing, I started noticing the details. A charred car sat in the middle of the street, its windows melted. Beside it, A toppled child's bicycle, with one tire still spinning as if someone had just abandoned it. The sight filled my chest with a deep, almost suffocating emptiness. And then, I saw the people, or at least what was left of them. Bodies lay on the ground, some covered by dust, others partially buried under rubble. Some were in escape positions, as if they had tried to run from whatever had happened there. The silence was absolute, except for the occasional sound of some structure collapsing in the distance. My mind spun with questions. Where was I? What had happened? Was I dead? Was this hell? My heart pounded, and each step felt harder than the last. I wanted to scream, but it seemed my voice had been taken along with the sound of the world. That was when, in the distance, I saw something that made me stop. The figure of the man in white was back. He stood in the middle of the street, his back to me, looking at the ruins as if observing something far beyond what my eyes could see. There was an unsettling serenity in his posture, but also a deep sadness that seemed to fill the air around him. "Hey," I shouted, my voice finally coming out, though hoarse and trembling. "Who are you? What's happening?" He didn't respond. Slowly, he turned his head in my direction, and his eyes met mine. It was as if time stood still. His gaze was impossible to describe. There was sadness, yes, but also something more, compassion, understanding, and a message that seemed to whisper directly to my soul. "You need to see." Before I could say anything else, the ground started shaking beneath my feet. Buildings around began collapsing like sandcastles, and the sky turned red, as if on fire. The figure disappeared again, leaving me alone amidst the growing chaos. Suddenly, everything around me started dissolving, like a painting someone was washing away with water. I was overcome by a sense of vertigo as the world shifted again. I didn't know where I was going, but something told me it wasn't over yet. When the environment finally stabilized, I realized I was in a completely different place. A room full of technology, shouts, and hurried voices. It was as if I had been transported to the heart of a decision that would define the destiny of us all. When my senses adjusted, I realized I was in a room that seemed straight out of a war movie. High-tech monitors covered the walls, blinking with maps and graphs showing military movements. Sirens blared insistently, filling the air with an inescapable tension. Men and women in uniform moved frantically between workstations, shouting instructions and reports at each other. A large central screen displayed the image of a rocket ascending into the sky. It was impossible to ignore the intense glow of the flame propelling that deadly machine. Around the screen, worried faces watched every movement. The words "possible hostile launch" were highlighted in red in the upper corner. "What's the confirmation?" shouted a stocky man who seemed to be the commander. He wore an insignia identifying him as Captain Joshua Lark. His voice was firm, but there was a trace of desperation in it. "Someone tell me if this is real or a system error." A woman, apparently the lead analyst, answered in a nervous tone. "The data indicates the rocket is armed, sir. Unknown origin, but the trajectory places it as a direct threat." The captain squinted, sweat running down his forehead. He slowly turned a key fixed to the panel in front of him, activating a series of red lights. A momentary silence engulfed the room, broken only by the sound of the sirens. Everyone was looking at him. "Retaliation protocol, sir?" asked a young officer beside him. His voice was hesitant, almost pleading. "We have no choice," the captain replied, his hand hovering over a large button on the center of the panel, a red alert flashing. "If this is an attack, we need to act before it's too late." I watched everything intently, though no one seemed to notice my presence. It was as if I were an invisible spectator, condemned to watch as the fate of millions was decided. I wanted to scream, to stop them, but my voice seemed caught in my throat. "Are you sure about this, sir?" The analyst spoke again, her voice trembling. "If we press this button, it could trigger something that we can't control." The captain looked her in the eyes, his expression laden with conflict. "If we don't press it, we run the risk of being destroyed. Is that what they want, Sarah? For us to stand still and wait?" The tension was palpable. The seconds dragged on like hours, and I could feel the weight of the decision the man was about to make. Then, he closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and with a swift motion, pressed the button. A louder siren blared, and the room filled with screams and alarms. Screens began showing missiles being launched from various bases. Each point on the map represented an ongoing retaliation, and the lines crossing the globe indicated a conflict of catastrophic proportions. "Sir, we're detecting responses from multiple nations," shouted another officer. "It's a chain reaction." The lights in the room began flickering, and chaos ensued. I watched everything, unable to look away. The captain, who moments before seemed so resolute, now had a pale face and trembling hands. It was as if he understood what he had just unleashed, and then I saw him again. The man in white was there, standing at the back of the room observing. His gaze was fixed on me this time, as if saying, "Do you understand now?" Before I could process it, the entire room began to dissolve around me. The sound of the sirens became a distant echo, and the light from the screens was replaced by a blinding glow that completely blinded me. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a new place. It was as if I were floating in space, looking at Earth from afar, and what I saw made my heart stop. When the intense light subsided, I realized I was no longer in a room, but floating in space. I could see the Earth, a blue and vibrant sphere, but something was terribly wrong. Luminous lines were crossing the skies, intercontinental missiles launched from all parts of the planet. It was a terrifying spectacle of imminent destruction. I witnessed explosions happening in real time, one after the other. Each point of light appearing on the globe marked the impact of a missile. The cities, once full of life, were snuffed out like candles in the wind. The sight was brutal. From space, the Earth seemed to be consumed by flames. What was once a vibrant planet now became a mosaic of destruction and despair. The scene seemed like a nightmare. The lights of the great metropolises were disappearing, one by one. New York, London, Beijing, Tokyo, Los Angeles. Each city succumbing to the impact, leaving behind only darkness. My heart ached with every new explosion, and a sense of helplessness overcame me. There was nothing I could do, nothing. Suddenly, my perspective changed. I was no longer merely floating. It was as if I were being pulled closer. Now, I could see the streets of the cities that had been destroyed. Remnants of buildings were scattered like broken toys. People were running desperately, trying to save what could no longer be saved. A deafening sound echoed as another missile hit a city. The shockwave was so powerful it seemed to pass through everything, including my body. Even knowing I wasn't physically there, I felt each impact. I saw children crying, families hugging for the last time, and crowds running aimlessly. It was the end of the world as we knew it. And then he appeared again, the man in white. He was beside me, looking at the planet with an expression that mixed deep sadness and something that seemed to be resignation. He said nothing, but his gaze said it all. This was the work of human pride, mistrust, greed. It wasn't inevitable but chosen. Why? The words finally left my mouth. My voice was a whisper, laden with pain and confusion. "Why didn't you do anything?" He turned to me, his face serene, but his eyes reflecting the weight of countless generations. It wasn't my choice. His voice echoed in my mind, clear and compassionate. It was theirs. It was all of theirs. I wanted to argue, to scream, to find some way to justify what was happening. But there was no justification. The destruction wasn't the result of a single event. It wasn't about a single button being pressed. It was the result of years, decades, centuries of wrong decisions, distorted priorities, accumulated hatred. As I continued to observe, the scene changed again. I saw the planet as a whole, and this time, there were no missiles, just a void. The world was dark, without lights, without movement. It was as if Earth had lost all life. An absolute silence filled the space, and the vibrant beauty of the planet had been replaced by something dead. The man in white reached out his hand, and for a moment, I felt something strange, a warmth, a hope. "There's still time," he said, his voice sounding like a distant echo. "But it depends on you all." Before I could ask what he meant, I was pulled back into another vision. My body was thrust downward, and what I saw was even more devastating. A world where destruction had already occurred, and the survivors lived among the ruins. When the descent ceased, I found myself in a place that seemed caught between life and death. The landscape before me was barren and desolate, marked by vast expanses of dry, cracked earth. What might once have been forests were now charred and twisted trunks, like skeletal fingers pointing at the cloudy, colorless sky. There was no sound of birds, wind, or any sign of life, only an unsettling silence that made every step of mine seem like a shout. I walked slowly, trying to understand where I was. In the distance, I saw a devastated city, its buildings shattered, as if an invisible force had ripped them apart. I walked toward the rubble, drawn to what seemed to be movement. As I approached, I realized there were survivors. They were few, huddled in dark corners, shrunk like frightened animals. Their bodies were thin, covered in dirty, ragged clothes. Their faces were marked by hunger, despair, and above all, a deep distrust of one another. I saw a man and a woman fighting fiercely over a piece of moldy bread. The woman held a small child in her arms who was crying incessantly. "That's mine," the man shouted, his voice rough and angry. "I found it first. Please, it's for my baby," the woman pleaded, tears running down her dusty face. The man, however, showed no mercy. He grabbed the bread and ran, leaving the woman on the ground, crying while holding her daughter. The scene was like a stab to the heart. What had happened to humanity? How did we get to this point? My mind drifted back to the previous visions, to what I had witnessed in the command center and in space. This was the result, not just of the missiles, but of everything that came before. Years of selfishness, greed, and mistrust, rooted in every decision. I continued walking through the city, trying to find something, anything that could offer hope. I passed through streets covered in debris, where groups of people scavenged through the trash in search of food or water. I saw a fight break out on a corner, when a man tried to steal what looked like a bottle of water from another. The fight ended quickly, with one of them lying on the ground, motionless. But then something different caught my attention. Amidst the chaos, I spotted a small group gathered in a partially destroyed building. They were sitting in a circle, sharing something, perhaps food, perhaps stories. As I got closer, I heard soft voices singing a melody that seemed familiar. It was a hymn. "There is refuge in God. Even in the storm," they sang. Their voices were weak, but they were full of something that was missing in the rest of that world. Faith. At the center of the circle, a gray-haired woman was distributing small pieces of bread. It wasn't much, but each received it with gratitude. I felt something stir inside me. Amidst the devastation, there was still kindness, there was still hope. They noticed me as I approached, and the gray-haired woman smiled gently. "Are you lost, young man?" she asked with a soft voice. I don't know," I replied, feeling more vulnerable than ever. She offered me a piece of bread, small and simple, but full of meaning. "Here," she said, even in the air. In moments of desperation, we can always share what we have. As I ate, I realized there was something sacred in that moment. In a world that seemed to have lost everything, there were still those who refused to abandon their humanity. It was as if faith was anchoring these people, preventing them from being consumed by the chaos around them. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, the man in white appeared again, standing beside the small group. He looked at me, his eyes full of calm, but also urgency. I knew there was more to see, more to understand. Before I could say or ask anything, I was pulled into another vision. This time, darkness was replaced by a soft and welcoming light. When I opened my eyes, the difference was immediate. There was no chaos, no darkness. I was in a small room, illuminated by a soft light that seemed to emanate from candles or old lamps. The environment was simple but welcoming. The walls were worn by time, with patches of peeling paint, but decorated with paintings depicting biblical passages. In the center, there was a rustic wooden table, where some people were gathered. The contrast was almost shocking. The atmosphere here was completely different from anything I had seen before. There were no screams, fights, or despair. Instead, there were quiet voices and soft songs that filled the air with an inexplicable peace. I watched as the group, composed of about 10 people, shared a piece of bread that seemed too small to feed them all. Nonetheless, each person received their portion with a smile and silent reverence. There was something sacred in that gesture. It was as if that simple act of sharing was more important than the food itself. A woman with gray hair led the group, She had a serene expression, but her eyes conveyed strength and determination. Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil. Her words were accompanied by murmurs of agreement, and a younger man who seemed to be struggling with exhaustion replied, "But for how long can we hold on? The world outside is lost. There's nothing left for us." The woman placed her hand on his shoulder and responded with a calm smile. "As long as we have faith, as long as we have each other, we're not lost. What matters is not what happens around us, but what we carry in our hearts." I continued to watch, fascinated. Something inside me began to change. In all the scenarios I had seen so far, the chaos, the destruction, the despair, I had never felt something like this. Genuine hope, a peace that seemed to defy logic. A woman in the back began to sing, her soft voice filling the silence. The others soon joined in. Soon joined in. The melody was familiar, an old hymn my grandmother used to sing when I was a child. "And though the storms may come, my heart will find refuge in thee." It was impossible not to be touched by that song. I felt a knot form in my throat, and tears began to stream down my face without me realizing it. I didn't know why I was crying. Perhaps it was because of the contrast with everything I had seen until now. Or perhaps it was because, for the first time, I felt something I had forgotten: hope. It was then that the man in white appeared again. But this time, he was inside the circle, among those people. He said nothing, but his gaze was fixed on me. It was as if he were asking, "Do you understand now?" I wanted to respond, but was at a loss for words. I could only look back, letting my tears speak for me. He nodded slightly, as if he knew what I was thinking. Before I could approach or ask anything, the room began to fade away slowly, as if being enveloped by a veil of light. The voices of the group continued to echo as everything around me dissolved. Suddenly I was alone again, surrounded by a silent darkness. But this time there was something different. It wasn't an oppressive void, but a tranquil space, as if it were a place for reflection. The darkness around me was silent, but not oppressive. It felt like a suspended space in time, a pause between everything I had witnessed and something new that was yet to come. The weight of the previous visions was fresh in my mind. The devastation, the suffering, the despair, but also the hope found in the prayer room. My heart was full of questions, but before I could formulate them, a voice resonated clear and deep. "Silas." It was the same voice I had heard before, when the man in white appeared. He was there again, but this time, not as a distant or silent figure. He was before me, and his eyes met mine with an intensity that seemed to penetrate my soul. "Do you understand what you saw?" he asked, his voice serene but laden with significance. It wasn't an accusation but a question that demanded honesty. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I think so, but I still don't know why. Why show me all this?" He approached, and there was something in his presence that was both comforting and overwhelming. "Because you needed to see. Because what you saw is not just a possible future, but a reflection of the choices humanity has been making for a long time." I nodded, trying to absorb his words. But was this all because of a missile, a decision? I asked, remembering the command center and the moment the button was pressed. He paused before answering. "The missile was just the trigger. The real destruction began long before, Silas. It began with selfishness, pride, greed, with the inability to forgive and trust. These are humanity's true enemies, not weapons or technology." The words lingered in the air, and I found myself reflecting on everything I had witnessed. The fights over food, the impulsive decisions in the command center, and even how the people in the prayer room found strength in faith and solidarity. Everything seemed connected. "So what can I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm just one person. How can I change something so big and so broken?" He smiled gently, a smile that seemed to carry the wisdom of ages. "You don't need to change the whole world, Silas. Just start with what's within your reach. Live with purpose, love, forgive, trust, and inspire others to do the same. The greatest changes begin with small steps." The words echoed in my mind, and for a moment, I felt warmth fill my chest. It wasn't as if all the world's problems had disappeared, but there was a sense that maybe there was still hope. A hope that depended on each of our choices. "You saw what can happen," he continued. "But you also saw that even amidst destruction, there are those who don't give up. Humanity is capable of great mistakes, but also of great acts of love and redemption. Never forget that." I looked at him, and tears began to roll down my face again. "I promise," I said, my voice choked. "I promise. I'll do my part." When I raised my eyes, he was gone, but his presence was still palpable. The space around me began to shift, and I felt as if I were being pulled back to reality. When I opened my eyes, I was in a familiar place. The fluorescent lights and the distant sound of machines monitoring vital signs told me I was in a hospital. I was back. The rhythmic sound of a heart monitor filled my ears, bringing me back to reality. I blinked several times, trying to adjust my vision to the cold white light of the hospital. The tiled white ceiling and sterile walls confirmed that I was back, but something in me had changed. It wasn't just the environment that seemed different. I was different. "Silas," Lisa's voice broke the silence, full of worry and relief. When I turned, I saw her face, her eyes swollen from crying. When I turned, I saw her face, her eyes swollen from crying. She was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand tightly, as if afraid of losing me again. "Are you okay?" she asked, leaning forward. "You fainted in gym class." I thought that. Her voice faltered, and she squeezed my hand even tighter. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. Lisa noticed and quickly offered me a glass of water. After a few sips, my voice finally returned, albeit hesitantly. "I think I'm okay," I murmured, looking around like I was, still trying to comprehend where I was. "What happened?" "You collapsed suddenly," she explained. "Your heart stopped for a few moments, Silas. They had to revive you before bringing you here. It was terrifying." Her words hit me hard. My heart had stopped. That explained the sensation of being between life and death, but it didn't explain what I had seen. The visions were still vivid in my mind, as clear as the real world. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. Lisa kept talking, but her voice seemed distant. All I could think about were the images of destruction, the command center, the prayer room, and the man in white. My mind spun with questions, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of clarity. I knew I couldn't ignore what had happened. "Silas?" Lisa called my attention again. "Are you listening to me? Is everything all right?" I looked at her, realizing how concerned she seemed. "Yes, I'm listening," I replied, but my tone was distant. How could I explain something like that? How could I tell someone I had seen the world's end and at the same time a glimpse of hope? Before I could say anything else, a doctor entered the room. He was a middle-aged man with a professional but tired smile. "Good to see you're awake, Silas," he said, checking my chart. "You gave us quite a scare. Your collapse was serious, but tests show you're stable now." "Why did I faint?" I asked, my voice filled with curiosity and fear. "Was it something serious?" The doctor hesitated for a moment before responding. "We're still investigating, but it seems it was a cardiac episode. Something unusual for someone your age and fitness. But sometimes these things happen. We'll do more tests to ensure everything's okay." He continued talking about precautions and rest. But my mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just a collapse. I knew it. What I experienced was more than a medical incident. It was something bigger. Something spiritual. The doctor finished his instructions and left, leaving Lisa and me alone again. "You're quiet," Lisa said, leaning in to study me. "You're thinking about what happened, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. "Lisa, I saw things that I don't even know how to explain. It was like I was somewhere else. I saw the world destroying itself. I saw people fighting for survival, but I also saw hope." She looked at me, confused and concerned. Was it a dream because of the fainting? "It wasn't a dream," I replied firmly. "It felt real. It felt real. Real. More real than anything I've ever experienced." Lisa hesitated, but then squeezed my hand again. "Whatever it is, you're here now. And if it was important, maybe it means something." Maybe you should find out what to do about it." Her words stayed with me. Lisa was right. I didn't know why I was chosen to see all that, but I knew I needed to do something about it. While looking out the hospital window, at the sky beginning to tint orange with sunset, a sense of purpose grew within me. The following days in the hospital were a mix of silence and introspection. While doctors and nurses came and went, checking vital signs and conducting tests, my mind was fixated on the visions I had experienced. What was shown to me wasn't just a series of images. It was a call, an urgent message. And I couldn't simply return to life as before, ignoring everything that had happened. Lisa visited me every day, bringing a warm energy that helped me stay grounded. Sometimes she would make me laugh with her stories about the school's students, but other times she would just sit in silence, holding my hand as I gazed at the ceiling, lost in thoughts. "You'll come out of this with something bigger, Silas," she said one of those days, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I know you're trying to understand what happened, but maybe you just need to start small." "Start small?" I murmured to myself. Her words kept echoing in my mind, and that night, while the hospital plunged into an almost absolute silence, I finally understood. I didn't need to save the entire world at once. It wasn't my role to fix the mistakes of all humanity, but I could change the way I lived, how I treated others, and maybe, just maybe, that could inspire someone else to do the same. When I was discharged, going home was a relief. Everything seemed familiar, but at the same time everything felt different. The simple act of walking along the sidewalk to my door was a renewed experience. The wind on my face, the sound of leaves rustling, was clearer than ever. It was as if the world around me was trying to remind me of its beauty, despite everything I had seen in the visions. However, the sensation of normalcy was temporary. On the first night back, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, lost in thought. Everything felt so futile now. The school grades, the worries about the future, the insignificant arguments. How could I continue living the same way, knowing what I knew? I decided I needed to make changes, starting with the people around me. The next day, I went to see Lisa. She was in the school library, flipping through a biology book. "Hey," I called. And she looked at me with a warm smile. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You seem different." Hey," I replied, sitting beside her. "And you're right, I am different. I've seen things that made me realize everything we do matters. I want to start making a difference, even if it's something small." She tilted her head, curious. "Like what?" "Like being more present," I explained. "Being there for people, listening more, helping where I can. I don't want to live as if nothing matters anymore." Lisa smiled, and at that moment, I felt like I was on the right path. I began implementing small changes in my day-to-day. I helped a classmate who was struggling in math, even when I knew I wouldn't get anything in return. I started visiting a local shelter on weekends, serving meals to the homeless. Each gesture, no matter how small, seemed to create a ripple of positive impact. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed that the internal changes began to influence those around me. Lisa, who was always supportive, joined me at the shelter. Other classmates started noticing my behavior, and intriguingly, began acting differently as well. It wasn't a magical or immediate transformation, but it was enough to give me hope. The visions I had in the hospital continued to be present in my mind. But now, instead of paralyzing me, they moved me. They were constant reminders that our choices, no matter how simple they seem, have the power to shape the world around us. That night, before going to sleep, I closed my eyes and said a simple prayer. "Thank you for giving me a new chance. Help me continue on the right path, even when it's difficult." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a peace I couldn't explain. Tomorrow arrived with soft sunlight streaming through the slits of my window. The light seemed different now, more welcoming, as if carrying a message of rebirth. I got up slowly, breathing deeply, and thought about how that simple act of waking felt like a gift. Each new day was an opportunity to start again, to do something meaningful, no matter how small. My life was far from extraordinary, but that didn't bother me anymore. I started finding joy in the little things. A child's laughter in the park, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of a cup of coffee in my hands. All these things, which once went unnoticed, were now reminders that life, despite its imperfections, was precious. At school, the changes began to draw attention, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because my actions seemed to resonate with those around me. A classmate named Brian, known for being reserved and a bit bitter, stopped me one day after class. "Hey, Silas," he started hesitantly. "I've noticed you've been different, more at peace. I don't know. How do you do it?" His question caught me off guard, but I smiled. "I just try to focus on what matters, you know. On people, on the present moment. It's easy to get lost in everything happening around us, but I believe we can choose how to react." Brian frowned, clearly reflecting on my words. "I never thought of it that way," he confessed. "Maybe I'll try it too." These brief moments, these seemingly trivial conversations, began to add up. Each interaction was a chance to plant a seed, even if I didn't see the results immediately. I understood that my mission wasn't grand or flashy. It was simply to be a positive influence, a beacon of light amid the darkness. However, not everything was easy. There were times I felt discouraged, especially when faced with the world's reality. News of conflicts, natural disasters, and the constant division among people still shook me. During those moments I recalled the visions, especially the prayer room. Those people, despite being surrounded by chaos, found strength in faith and solidarity. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Lisa showed up at my house. She carried an envelope in her hand and had a smile on her face. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing me the envelope. Inside was a thank you letter from the shelter where we used to help. They talked about how our presence had inspired other volunteers and how donations had increased since we got involved. A lump formed in my throat as I read it. It was proof that, even without realizing it, we were making a difference. "See?" Lisa said, crossing her arms. "I told you that starting small makes a difference." I smiled at her, grateful for her friendship and constant support. "You were right, as always." Over time, I realized that my path wasn't about changing the entire world, but about living with purpose and faith. It wasn't about speaking to crowds or writing books about my experience. It was about living each day as if it were an opportunity to love, help, and inspire. The vision I had wasn't a sentence for the world, but a warning. And more importantly, an invitation for us to choose a different path. Every choice, every act of kindness, every gesture of love was a way to build a better future. That night, while looking at the stars through my bedroom window, I felt a calm presence, as if the man in white was there with me. I closed my eyes and smiled. His message was clear. There is still hope. And that hope now lives in me.